There are moments in life when destiny doesn't knock gently. It kicks the door down, and on that grey, unforgiving Tuesday, Emma Whitfield felt the blow in every fibre of her soul. The registrar's office was small, stifling, and bathed in the cold, flickering glow of a single fluorescent light that buzzed like a dying insect. The air hung heavy with the scent of old paper, stale coffee, and quiet judgment. Emma's hand trembled as she gripped the pen so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. "Are you sure?" the registrar asked one final time, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile room. Emma didn't answer. She simply pressed the pen to the paper and signed. Emma Whitfield, to the Whitfield Group. The moment the ink dried, a ripple of stifled laughter spread through the small crowd of witnesses behind her. Whispers slithered through the air like smoke. "She's lost her mind. Poor thing, what did they threaten her with? Imagine throwing away everything for him." Emma didn't turn around. She refused to let them see the storm raging behind her eyes. The weight of every gaze pressed into the back of her neck like 1,000 thumbtacks. Beside her stood the man she had just been forced to marry. Daniel Hayes. He wore scuffed boots still stained with motor oil and a worn jacket that had seen too many long days. His dark hair was slightly messy, his jaw shadowed with stubble. He looked exactly like what everyone believed him to be, an ordinary struggling mechanic who had somehow won the lottery of a lifetime. But when he took the pen, his hand was steady as stone. No hesitation, no flicker of triumph. Only a quiet, unshakable calm that sent an unexplained chill down Emma's spine. He signed his name, Daniel Hayes, with deliberate, unhurried strokes, then capped the pen and placed it down with perfect silence. And that was the exact moment every phone in the room began to vibrate at once. A strange, electric tremor swept through the crowd. People fumbled for their devices. Expressions shifted from mockery to confusion, then to outright alarm. Screens lit up with breaking financial alerts. Whispers turned into urgent murmurs. The markets had just moved violently. Something colossal had happened in the shadows of the financial world. But Emma didn't reach for her phone. She turned her head slowly and looked at the man now legally bound to her. Daniel met her gaze. For one fleeting second, something ancient and powerful flickered behind his eyes, then vanished like a shadow at dawn. But what none of them realized was that the man she had just been shackled to in holy matrimony was the reason the entire financial world was suddenly in chaos. Tau. Eve Gold. The third had passed. Tea. Tau. Min. The Whitfield family estate had always been a gilded cage. Emma had grown up beneath its towering ceilings and heavy expectations. She understood two truths from a very young age. The Whitfield name was a crown of immense power, and that crown demanded absolute, merciless obedience. 6 months earlier, her father, Gerald Whitfield, the cold architect of their empire, had summoned her home from London with a single commanding sentence. "The company needs you here." Now standing in the grand library that smelled of aged leather lemon polish and old money, Emma faced the devastating truth. "The Whitfield Group is collapsing," her father announced, his voice like iron striking stone. 3 catastrophic investments, a leveraged acquisition gone horribly wrong. A major institutional partner has withdrawn support. In 6 weeks, we will be forced into structured bankruptcy. Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The empire her grandfather had built brick by bloody brick was crumbling. But Gerald Whitfield was not a man who accepted defeat. "There is one solution," he said, eyes cold and calculating. "A creditor, operating through layers of holding companies, has offered us a lifeline." Emma's heart pounded. "Not for equity, not for repayment terms." Her father paused. "In exchange for a marriage." The silence that followed was deafening. "To a man named Daniel Hayes," he continued. A local mechanic, a single father, a man of modest means. Emma stared at her father, her stepmother Patricia's indifferent gaze, and her Uncle Clifford swirling his amber drink in the corner. "You want me to sell myself to a stranger to save a dying company?" Her uncle smiled thinly. "The alternative, my dear, is losing everything, the company, the homes, the foundations, the reputation, all of it." Patricia's voice dripped with false practicality. "We're not asking you to love him, Emma. We're asking you to be practical." Emma felt the walls of her carefully built life closing in like a tomb, and in that moment, with her family's future hanging by a thread, she made the sacrifice. She said yes. The ceremony itself was cold, mechanical, and mercilessly brief. Daniel was already waiting when Emma arrived with her aunt as witness. He stood tall and still, a man out of place in her world of privilege. He offered no grand words, no nervous smile, just that same unnerving steadiness as he looked at her. The vows were spoken, papers were signed, and just like that, Emma Whitfield became Emma Hayes. As they stepped out of the registrar's office into the grey afternoon light, Daniel quietly held the car door open for her. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped inside. Her old life was over. A new, unknown one had just begun. New, unknown one had just begun. 20 minutes outside the glittering city lay a modest 1940s craftsman bungalow. Green front door. A porch that sagged just slightly on the left. Driftwood and sea glass wind chimes swaying gently in the breeze. A child's bicycle leaning against the fence. Emma stood at the front gate with only one rolling suitcase, staring at her new reality. Daniel unlocked the door and held it open without a word. The house was small, warm, and unpretentious. Low ceilings. Honey-colored hardwood floors worn smooth by years of real living. A bright yellow kitchen with copper pots hanging from the rack, and a child's colorful drawing stuck to the refrigerator with a lobster magnet. Then she appeared. An 8-year-old girl with her father's dark hair stepped into the hallway, clutching a thick book about deep-sea creatures. Her eyes widened with pure, fearless curiosity. "Hi," she said brightly. "Are you going to live here now?" Emma swallowed hard. "For now, yes. The girl, Lily," studied her with serious little eyes. "Do you want to see my room?" Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe later." Lily looked up at her father. "Dad, she's pretty." Daniel's reply was soft, almost tender. "I know." Emma turned away, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. This was her life now, married to a poor mechanic, living in a tiny bungalow. Trapped in a deal to save an empire that had never truly cared for her. But what none of them realized was that the man standing quietly beside her was far more dangerous and far more extraordinary than anyone could possibly imagine. The first days in that small craftsman bungalow felt like stepping into a foreign country whose language she did not speak. Everything was quieter than Emma had expected, smaller, more real. Daniel rose every morning at 5,030, long before the sun had any intention of showing itself. Emma would lie in the guest bedroom, listening to the faint sounds of him moving through the house like a ghost, never loud, never rushed, never demanding attention. By the time she emerged at 7, the aroma of fresh coffee filled the warm yellow kitchen. Breakfast waited on the counter. Simple eggs, toast with butter, or whatever fruit was in season. Nothing extravagant, just there. He never waited for gratitude. He never announced his efforts. He simply left them like quiet offerings and disappeared to the garage. Daniel Hayes was a mechanic at a small, independent shop just 3 blocks away. He left at 7,005 every morning in his old pickup truck, returning at 6,000 sharp. On Tuesdays, he picked Lily up early for swimming lessons. On Thursdays, he volunteered at her school's science club. He never asked Emma to join their rituals. He never imposed his world upon hers. And that careful, respectful distance unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. One rainy evening, Emma returned from a tense meeting to find her favorite pair of Italian leather heels placed neatly by the front door. The left shoe, badly scuffed and damaged only days earlier, had been meticulously repaired. The leather was buffed to a soft sheen, the scuff completely invisible. She picked it up slowly, turning it over in her hands as if it were an artifact from another life. She said nothing about it at dinner. Neither did Daniel. Instead, little Lily filled the kitchen with her bright, unstoppable energy. She sat at the table clutching her book about deep-sea creatures, eyes wide with wonder. "There are creatures living at the bottom of the ocean that don't need sunlight at all," she declared passionately. "They survive on chemicals from the rocks for maybe 1 billion years." Daniel listened with quiet fondness, nodding. "Probably." Lily turned her curious gaze to Emma. "What do you think?" Emma paused, caught off guard by the sincerity in the child's voice. "The ocean is still mostly unexplored," she replied gently. "Scientists discover new species every single year." Lily's face lit up. "Do you like the ocean?" "I don't know it well enough," Emma admitted. A small, hopeful smile appeared on Lily's face. "Maybe we could go sometime. Dad takes me to the tide pools. It's magical." Emma looked down at her plate, feeling something crack inside her chest. For the first time, she didn't say no. "Jew! She didn't say no! Ah!" Jew! But the real cracks in Daniel's ordinary image began appearing soon after. 3 weeks into their strange arrangement, Emma was on a serious video call in the living room, passionately debating complex real estate debt structures and yield assumptions with a former colleague. When the call ended, she walked into the kitchen for more coffee and found Daniel calmly washing dishes. Without turning around, he spoke in that low, steady voice. "The swap structure they're proposing only works if the underlying cap rate projections hold. If they're off by more than 40 basis points, the entire deal reverses and collapses." Emma froze mid-step, coffee pot hovering in her hand. "That," she said slowly, "is an incredibly specific observation for a mechanic." He rinsed a glass with deliberate care. "You were speaking loud enough to hear." She stared at his back. "Where exactly did you learn about cap rates?" He dried his hands on a dish towel and finally turned, expression unreadable. "Read it somewhere." Then he walked out to the garage as if he hadn't just dismantled her professional conversation with surgical precision. I do. 2 weeks later, the second fracture appeared. Emma came in from the garden after a long morning call and heard Daniel speaking quietly on the phone in the hallway. His voice was calm, measured, and carried absolute authority. "Hold the Singapore position. Don't touch it until I say so. The Harris acquisition? No. Walk away immediately. The liabilities aren't priced in. Tell them I'm not available. They know why." He hung up, saw her standing there, and offered zero explanation. "Work?" she asked, heart pounding. "Yeah," he replied simply. Then he pulled on his coveralls and drove off to the garage like any other ordinary day. That afternoon, Emma checked the financial news with trembling fingers. The Harris acquisition, a fierce bidding war worth hundreds of millions, had suddenly and mysteriously collapsed. The frontrunner had withdrawn without explanation. She sat motionless at the kitchen table, staring at Daniel's empty chair, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on her like a coming storm. But what none of them realized was that the man she had married, the man the world saw as a nobody, was hiding one of the sharpest, most dangerous minds in global finance. Then came the day the Whitfield empire truly began to bleed. A ruthless rival named Preston Hale launched a calculated strike. 3 key creditors withdrew support overnight. By afternoon, the company's credit lines were frozen. Panic spread through the family like wildfire. Emma spent the entire day fighting desperate battles on the phone. By evening, she was drained, defeated, and sitting alone in the small living room when Daniel and Lily returned from swimming. Lily ran past, chattering happily about butterfly kicks. Daniel took one look at Emma's exhausted, red-rimmed eyes and said nothing at first. Instead, he disappeared into the kitchen. A short while later, he returned with 2 steaming mugs of tea, not coffee, and sat across from her in silence. No questions, no solutions, just quiet, steady presence while Lily's joyful voice drifted from her bedroom like distant music. They sat together for nearly 20 minutes as the weight of her crumbling world pressed down. Finally, Emma whispered brokenly, "It's going to fall apart, everything my family built." Daniel wrapped his strong hands around his mug and said gently, "Sometimes things fall." He looked at her with those calm, unreadable eyes and asked the question that would haunt her. "Is the company what you truly wanted, Emma, or what you were supposed to want?" She had no answer. That night, sleep evaded her. At 4 a.m., she woke to an empty house and glanced out the window. Daniel's truck was gone. Emma Whitfield had always possessed the mind of a hunter. Numbers spoke to her. Patterns revealed themselves like hidden codes. And once a question lodged itself in her thoughts, she could not rest until the truth was dragged into the light. So while Daniel worked at the garage and Lily sat in school, Emma sat alone at the kitchen table with her laptop, a second cup of coffee growing cold beside her, and began to hunt Daniel Hayes. At first, the internet offered exactly what one would expect: ordinary, unremarkable records. A garage business license. School papers for Lily. Tax filings that painted the picture of a modest life. Just enough to seem real. But Emma was no ordinary searcher. The deeper she dug, the more the mask began to crack. There was a 3-year void, a silence so complete it felt deliberate. And then she found it. An old, forgotten article buried behind layers of archives and paywalls, published 11 years earlier. The headline hit her like a thunderclap. Hayes Capital Partners CEO vanishes from public life, leaving a multi-billion-dollar mystery behind. Emma read it once, then again, then a third time, her breath caught in her throat. Daniel Alexander Hayes. At only 29 years old, he had built Hayes Capital Partners into a legendary force in venture capital and private equity. In 4 short years, he had generated returns that made legends jealous. Analysts estimated the capital under his control had reached between $3 and $5 billion. Then, without warning, without scandal, without farewell, he disappeared. He transferred control to trusts of breathtaking complexity, installed independent boards, paid back every investor from his own fortune, and simply walked away from everything. The article whispered of burnout, of betrayal by those closest to him, of a man who had chosen to vanish from the world that had nearly destroyed him. Emma closed the laptop slowly. Her hands were trembling. She thought of the perfectly repaired heels. The casual, devastating insight about cap rates. The quiet phone call that had killed a major acquisition. The mysterious fund that had appeared out of nowhere to save her family's company. The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. The quiet mechanic sleeping under the same roof as her was one of the most powerful and dangerous financial minds alive. 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 The quiet mucker. Fate, it seemed, had one more revelation waiting. A few days later, Emma attended the prestigious Global Capital Forum in the heart of the financial district. She went only because the Whitfield Group still needed to project strength. She had no idea what awaited her. The grand hall was filled with the elite, people who moved markets with a whisper. Emma took her seat near the center as the lights dimmed for the keynote. The program listed only founding partner, OHCP Holdings. Then the side door opened, and Daniel walked onto the stage. He wore a charcoal suit cut so perfectly it seemed to disappear against his frame. His hair was the same, his face was the same, yet the moment he appeared, the entire room seemed to inhale at once. Conversations died. Heads turned. Titans of industry straightened in their seats. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs. Her glass of water froze halfway to her lips. Daniel scanned the room with that same unshakable calm she had seen every morning in their little yellow kitchen. His eyes found hers across the sea of faces. For one electric heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Then he began to speak. For the next 40 minutes, he delivered a masterclass, a quiet, devastatingly precise analysis of global capital flows that left some of the most powerful people in the room scribbling notes like students. His voice never rose. His presence never demanded. Yet every word carried the weight of absolute authority. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. Emma could not move. Afterward, as the room dissolved into networking and hushed conversations, Daniel walked straight through the crowd toward her. "Emma," he said, his voice low and intimate amid the chaos. "Daniel," she whispered, barely able to speak. They stood only a few feet apart, while the financial world's sharpest minds watched them with open fascination. "How long have you known?" he asked gently. "A few days," she answered. "I found the article." He nodded, a shadow of something ancient crossing his face. "I was going to tell you when I believed it was safe." "Safe for who?" she asked, voice tight. "For Lily," he said simply. "For the peaceful life we built far away from all of this." "Ah!" Emma stood in the living room, staring at Lily's colorful drawings on the wall. Whales, volcanoes, and a new one of 3 figures standing together at the edge of a tide pool. When she entered the kitchen, 2 mugs of tea waited on the counter. "Tell me everything," she said. Daniel leaned against the counter and, for the first time, let the armor fall completely. "I built Hayes Capital with my best friend from college and the woman I loved for 4 years. The 3 of us started with almost nothing. 5 years later we had everything. Then they betrayed me. They siphoned money from client accounts into vehicles they controlled. It was sophisticated, but not enough to hide from me." His voice remained calm, yet carried the weight of old wounds. "I dismantled the partnership. I paid back every single investor from my personal fortune. Then I walked away from billions. I wanted no part of that world anymore." He looked down for a moment. Lily was only 2. Her mother had already left. "I refused to let my daughter grow up in a world where every relationship was a transaction and every smile hid a calculation. I wanted her to have something real." Emma's eyes stung with unshed tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. "When they forced me to marry you, I had no idea who you really were." "I know," Daniel said softly. "Your Uncle Clifford approached me. He knew my past. I refused twice. Then he showed me what would happen to your family and what they were asking you to sacrifice." He met her eyes directly. "I agreed, but only if you chose it. I tried to make this house feel like a home instead of a prison. I know I can never erase how this began." Emma stared at the man across from her, the man who had quietly repaired her shoes, made her coffee, and sat with her in silence on the worst night of her life. "You were trying to be kind to me," she said, voice breaking. "At first, yes, because of guilt," he admitted. Then his voice softened. "But after a few weeks, it wasn't guilt anymore. I wanted to make your coffee. I wanted to fix your shoes. You ate what I left for you. You listened to Lily talk about the ocean. You defended me at that gala, even when you still believed I was nobody." A powerful silence filled the small kitchen. "I was wrong about you," Emma said, her voice raw with emotion. "In every single way." Daniel's eyes held hers with quiet intensity. "You were working with the wrong information." The air between them crackled, heavy, warm, and full of dangerous possibility. "I don't know what this is between us anymore," Emma whispered. "Neither do I," Daniel replied, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. "But I would very much like to find out, honestly this time." Preston Hale was not a man who accepted losing with grace. 3 weeks after Daniel's shadow reappeared in the financial world, Hale struck back with the cold precision of a predator who had scented blood. Old accusations, long buried, privately settled, and disproven, were resurrected and splashed across every financial outlet. Allegations of securities, violations, whispers of betrayal, a coordinated media storm designed to drag Daniel back into the spotlight he had spent years escaping. Emma discovered the news at 7 a.m., the glow of her phone cutting through the soft morning light of the little bungalow. Daniel stood at the counter calmly packing Lily's lunch as if the world outside wasn't trying to burn them down.
"You know?"
she asked quietly. "I know," he replied, sealing the bag with steady hands. "It's not true." "No," he said simply. "But the truth is buried deep." Emma's mind raced. This isn't the real attack. This is the distraction. She was right. While the headlines screamed, Preston Hale was moving silently to seize a critical 40% stake in one of the Whitfield Group's most vital subsidiaries. If he succeeded, he would create a governance deadlock that would force Daniel's hidden empire into a very public, very ugly war. Daniel would have to choose, fight in the open, and lose the quiet life he had built for Lily, or stay silent and watch Emma's family empire collapse once more. That morning, in the warm yellow kitchen that had become their sanctuary, they faced the storm together. With Lily safely at a neighbor's house, Emma and Daniel sat across the table, 2 laptops open between them like war maps. "Let me handle the subsidiary block," Emma said, her voice steady with new resolve. "I know Theodore Marsh personally. I can reach him." Daniel's eyes darkened with concern. "If you step into this, Hale will come after you personally. He'll try to destroy your reputation." "I know," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You protected my family when I had nothing to offer you. You did it quietly, even when I treated you like you were beneath me. Let me do this one thing because it's right." For a long moment, Daniel studied her. Something deep and powerful moved behind his eyes. Respect, admiration, and a love that had grown slowly in the shadows. Finally, he nodded. "Okay." By 10 a.m., Emma was in the car. By 2 p.m., she sat across from 70-year-old Theodore Marsh in a quiet conference room that smelled of old wood and quiet power. She didn't beg. She didn't negotiate like her father once would have. She told him the truth, raw and unfiltered, about Preston Hale's trap, about the pressure campaign, about what would happen to his own holdings if Hale succeeded. Then she made him an offer, not of money, but of shelter. Daniel's entities would protect 3 of Marsh's other vulnerable assets from the coming volatility. Marsh studied her for a painfully long time. "Your father," he said at last, "never once asked me for anything directly. He always sent intermediaries." "I know," Emma said softly. "I'm trying to be different." At 3:15 p.m., Theodore Marsh signed the lockup agreement. Hale's plan was dead. By evening, Daniel's legal team released 600 pages of meticulously preserved evidence. The original smear campaign collapsed like a house of cards. Corrections were issued. Reputations were repaired. Preston Hale retreated into silence. The war was over. The smell of Herb's garlic. Emma arrived home at 7,000 that evening, exhausted but victorious. The little bungalow glowed with warm golden light. The smell of herbs, garlic, and roasted vegetables filled the air. Lily sat at the kitchen table doing homework, chattering enthusiastically to a pencil about why giant squids were the most underrated creatures in the ocean. Emma paused in the doorway, just watching them. Her husband and the little girl who had offered to show her room on that very first terrifying day. This was real. Lily looked up first, eyes bright. You're back! I'm back, Emma smiled. Lily grinned. Did you win? Emma looked across the kitchen at Daniel, who was watching her with an expression she had never seen before. Open, unguarded, radiant with quiet pride and love. Yes, she said, voice thick with emotion. We won! Go! We won! W fouls the timey assen. Suppoist and N. 3 months later, the green front door remained the same. The driftwood and sea glass wind chimes still sang their gentle song whenever the coastal breeze slipped through. The lobster magnet still held new drawings on the refrigerator, including one of 3 figures standing together at the edge of a tide pool, a large crab waving from the water below. Emma had moved her consultancy work home. Daniel still worked at the garage 3 days a week, not because he needed the money, but because he loved the honest satisfaction of fixing something broken with his own 2 hands. One golden Saturday evening in late June, with Lily away on her first parent-free sleepover, Emma and Daniel sat together on the slightly sagging porch as the sun painted the sky in hues of rose and amber. Emma set her book down. I've been thinking, she said softly. Not about what the company needs. Not about what my family expects. About what I truly want. Daniel turned to her, patient and still. I want to stay, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Not because of any contract. Not because of what was forced upon us. I choose this life. I choose this house. I choose Lily's laughter in the mornings. I choose you, Daniel. A long, beautiful silence wrapped around them like a warm blanket. I want to try this for real, she whispered. Honestly, freely. From the very beginning. Daniel reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand, warm, calloused, and wonderfully steady. It's true for me too, he said, his voice low and full of quiet wonder. I choose you, Emma. Later that night, Lily burst through the front door sunburned, ecstatic, and proudly carrying a glass jar containing one very confused hermit crab. She had been explicitly told not to bring one home. She brought one anyway. His name is Copernicus, she announced triumphantly. Absolutely not, Daniel said, trying and failing to look stern. Emma laughed. A real, full, joyful laugh that filled the yellow kitchen and spilled out into the warm night. Daniel looked at her then, and in his eyes was everything, the quiet, enormous love that had grown between them like something rare and precious. And in that moment, standing in their small, imperfect, beautiful home, Emma Whitfield Hayes realized something profound. She had thought she was losing everything the day she signed those papers. Instead, she had found the life she never knew she was allowed to want. She thought she was sacrificing her future. Instead, she discovered her real home. Sometimes, the greatest treasures come disguised as the last thing you wanted. And sometimes, the man the world calls nobody turns out to be everything you've been searching for. This is Veiled Flame. Follow for more stories where the quiet ones win.